Hello, everyone. It's Colonel Gallagher, and here we are again. And we're going to get into one of the most difficult periods of the American presidency, Thomas Jefferson. And what I'm going to try to do is just explain two things dealing with two events of the Jefferson presidency. The first one is the Marbury v. Madison case, a Supreme Court case, and it has to do with the development of the Constitution, separation of powers, and the actual critical role of the Supreme Court. Since this is in the news lately, here we are. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, rest her soul, is dead. And this is now, we're talking a lot about Supreme Court appointments. So this is timely, I suppose. And the other one's Louisiana Purchase. And Louisiana Purchase is going to take a little bit of time. And it's probably one of the most difficult, one of the most convoluted stories. But I'm going to just try to get to something very specific. So let's start in. Jefferson became president after he won the election of 1800. He's following on the heels of John Adams, okay, who they both knew each other really well. Jefferson was the vice president under John Adams' one term as president. And when Jefferson won the election of 1800, he called it a revolution. Now in came Jefferson and his principles. This was the Democratic Republican societies. This is the common man, supposedly. And Jefferson, when he took office, I left off, I told you that famous speech, that line, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. Now we're going to put it to the test. And Jefferson, when he entered into the office in 1801, in March of 1801, ended up doing some practical things. That was the other quote he had. He wrote this wonderful quote to a gentleman, a friend of his, in this letter, and he said, "What is practicable must always, excuse me, let me get it right. What is practicable must often control what is pure theory." And this is kind of where Jefferson had to figure out the office of president. He's going to, out of all the Federalists that were appointed into the Supreme Court, into the courts itself, he's going to remove 109 of the 433 total federal officials because the president has appointment powers. He's going to remove 109 only of the 433. So it's not a massacre. He's not going and just cleaning house. The second thing that's really kind of interesting about this is the first thing he was adamant about, and he told his Secretary of State, Albert Gallatin, lose the taxes. Get rid of those taxes on the whiskey, tax on the farmer's back. Lose the taxes, okay? But Gallatin convinced Jefferson to keep the national bank. That one argument he deeply had with Hamilton. The charter would run out in 1811, Gallatin said. Let it run its course because it did offer a stabilizing factor to the economy. Practical. So it's not that Jefferson came in and twisted and undid everything. Now the Alien Sedition Act's out. Taxes, he said, get it off the farmer. But what was practical is to keep the bank until the Charter of 1811. Then let Congress decide this. So just to kind of give you a little sense of Jefferson coming into office, he's not coming in and just all of a sudden, redoing everything. However, let's get to Marbury v. Madison. It goes back to one thing that was interesting to Jefferson. John Marshall had been the Secretary of State under John Adams. And John Marshall, the very last things John Adams did before he left office is called the Midnight Appointments, where John Adams apparently was up late at night doing the one thing he could do, giving a lot of different Federalists positions in the courts. He could give these kind of appointments. And he gave appointments. The last one was to John Marshall himself. John Marshall would become the new Supreme Court Chief Justice. And Marshall would hold that position until 1825. He held it for like almost 24, 25 years. And what's going to happen is John Marshall, now Supreme Court Chief Justice, one of the cases is going to come before him. One of the first most important cases is the cases of these midnight appointments. John Adams handed out these appointments, right? No, Marshall was supposed to hand them out. Marshall conveniently forgot and left his office as Secretary of State, took office as Chief Justice, and he left some of these appointments on the desk. Well, in came Thomas Jefferson. His Secretary of State was James Madison, his good friend. And Jefferson pondered what to do with these appointments. Do I deliver them? Jefferson said. These are clearly Federalists, not Democratic Republicans. If I don't deliver them, then I can fill in the vacancies with who I wish. So this became the question. Don't deliver them was the answer. What happened was a man named William Marbury, Marbury, was waiting for that appointment. He knew he was going to get it. Well, it never arrived. So Marbury sued. He sued to get this appointment. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court, became known as Marbury v. Madison, because Madison's the Secretary of State supposed to deliver this. So this Marbury v. Madison case, 1803, came before none other than John Marshall, the Federalist, as the Supreme Court Chief Justice. Isn't this fun? So now what do? You're John Marshall. You just give him the appointment? No, you got to be careful. And what you learn here is Marshall's pretty savvy with this. What Marshall decided to do is tread lightly. He came to a very simple decision, basically. He said that the court has the ultimate constitutional authority to overrule any acts of Congress in this matter, as well as the states. Remember, we left off with the question of who determines the constitutionality of a law? Is it the states? Marshall made it real clear right there. He said, no, we do. Only the Supreme Court has what's called judicial review. So, did they deserve these appointments, he'd say? Marshall said, yes. But this expanded the court's jurisdiction beyond what the court could do. In other words, according to Article 3 of the Constitution, this went beyond what the court could do, and therefore Marshall said, I cannot deliver these appointments. It's out of the court's right. But what he did in essence then is attack Jefferson and his party, and Jefferson and his party could not respond to this. Marshall elevated the Supreme Court to be equal in status to the executive as well as the legislative. In other words, the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive executes the laws, but it was the Supreme Court who determined the constitutionality. My court, ball ends in my court. It secured the position of the Supreme Court down the road. So the Marbury case is very important. In fact, one of the Federalist newspapers, can you imagine, we had media that some supported the Democratic Republicans and some supported the Federalists. How shocking that we had divided media in America at that time. Said, end quote, Marshall's decision was, end quote, wisdom, impartiality, and the independence of the Supreme Court. Because after all, it's a Federalist branch. So the Federalists were praising the Supreme Court. It's amazing how far we've come, isn't it? Okay, now real quick, let's move into Louisiana Purchase, and I'm going to make this real simple. One of the greatest problems in the United States history has been the problem of contradictions and hypocrisy. And when you look at this, one of these is with Jefferson. Here's the man who penned the Declaration of Independence and stated, this all men are created equal. And really the Declaration of Independence is nothing other than the struggle for human liberty. Now here this is being said while you understand, I think Jefferson was a slave owner. What do you do? And one of the great quotes and lines came from a biographer of Jefferson, someone who wrote a biography of Jefferson named James Parton. Now, Parton wrote in 1874, but it still stands to today. He said basically, if Jefferson was wrong, America is wrong. If America is right, Jefferson was right. That's powerful. Because when you think of it this way, those words that Jefferson said are no less relevant to today. In there, this man who seemed to be filled with contradiction and hypocrisy, who had to carry the weight of the American nation on his back, which is too much for any human, really. Jefferson, there's a problem. How do you reconcile this? The author of the Declaration of Independence and the issue of owner slavery. Let's take a look at something real quick, and that's the Louisiana Purchase. Now, how did the Americans end up with Louisiana? You're going to hear all kinds of weird stories, but let me just tell you this. You know who you need to send a thank you card to if you want to do this? You need to send it to a country called Haiti. And you have to send it to a little over 500,000 blacks who fought for their independence, their struggle for human liberty on the island named Saint Domingue, which is the slave name, which was controlled by the French at this time period, And later on would be renamed Haiti because of Toussaint Louverture, who is this former slave who led this massive rebellion of former slaves to throw off the French and create, for the first time in world history, a free black republic, not far from the coastline of America. This is where you begin Louisiana Purchase, my friends. Before Napoleon's going to use a nickel for this, the reality is Napoleon had a problem. He had to get control of Haiti. Thus, Louisiana and Haiti go together. It's in the same vicinity and region, and both can be used as bases. Without Haiti, what good is Louisiana? And so Napoleon became more immersed into this quagmire known as Haiti, where he sent several of his men. Now, someone says, how do you explain it? I say, very simple. Louisiana Purchase is about mosquitoes and ice. On the island of Haiti, the French were dying left and right of something called malaria. This is because of mosquitoes, in an attempt to regain control of Haiti. In an attempt to do this, Napoleon's going to finally get exasperated. He's going to get frustrated over this. And finally, he's going to want to send another expedition to support this. And he gets bottled up by an ice storm. Napoleon now sitting there looking at this, concerned about Louisiana, concerned about this region, and in the need of finances. Came this wonderful opportunity of two Americans looking to buy New Orleans because Jefferson had sent them over there wanting to get the control of New Orleans where you could dump goods. The Americans could then use New Orleans, okay, in order to send their goods and connect it out into the rest of the world, especially into the Caribbean. Jefferson, though, is equally nervous about Haiti. And as he instructed his two ministers going to France, Livingston and Monroe, to offer $5 million for New Orleans, Napoleon's going to counter it and say, how about all Louisiana for $15 million? Because of the problem in Haiti. Thank you, Haiti. And so what happened is Jefferson, after he went back and forth, because if you remember in the past, we talked about strict constructionist. He's looking at the Constitution. He's concerned, is this beyond my powers and their capabilities? He's assured he's not. So all of a sudden, the American nation has more than doubled its size with the purchase of Louisiana. And what ironically it's about is it had to do with Haiti, and yet at the same time, it was the spread of American slavery eventually. Isn't this wonderful, this great irony in American history? So Jefferson now and the Americans feel secure. They've removed Napoleon, a dictator, from their shores. So it's a sense of security. It's also a sense of commerce because now you have access into these new regions with the port of New Orleans. Jefferson got what he wanted out of this. It's also a Jeffersonian victory because it is about expanding westward, moving away from the central area of the Federalist Party up in New England. It's decentralizing America to make more states. This is incredible. But you have to give credit to Haiti. And Jefferson hated the idea of a free black republic existing because it might give the American slaves some ideas. The irony was the administration before Jefferson, the Adams administration completely supported the rebellion on Haiti. The Americans sent materials and assistance. For heaven's sakes, they even sent one of Alexander Hamilton's good friends, Edward Stevens, down there to assist in the freedom of Haiti. Long live freedom and the struggle for human liberty under the Adams administration, but not under the Jefferson administration. If anything else, starkly showed the contrast between a Yankee Northerner thinking like Adams out of Boston and a Jeffersonian Virginian thinking out of the South. There it was, the revolution in Haiti. The Americans were put in a global context here. It had to be the struggle for human liberty, or it wasn't. This is why if Jefferson is wrong, America's wrong. If Jefferson is right, America is right. Another person to look at this is a man named Merrill Peterson, a historian, who wrote and said, Jefferson is really a sensitive reflector of America's troubles, search for the image of itself. Let me say this again. Jefferson was a sensitive reflector of America's troubled search for the image of itself. This is what we're doing today. We're troubled in searching for who we are as an American nation. And as an American nation, The Declaration of Independence is either, if we say Jefferson is right and America's right, Jefferson's wrong. The Declaration of Independence is a key. Either the Declaration of Independence is right or the America's right. If the Declaration of Independence is wrong, then America is wrong. And when you think of this, if you take it full circle, then you come back to the greatest of them all, in my book, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln said, "All hail Jefferson, the man who is the author of these ideas." And it was Lincoln whose administration, the first time in 1862, recognized, first time ever, an American president recognized the independence of Haiti, 1862. It was also the Americans under Lincoln who discussed the ideas and said the Declaration of Independence is the truth. It is the ideas of this nation, of this country. And therein lies in the Declaration of Independence the hope for mankind, the last best hope on earth. If America is right, Jefferson is right. It is for the current generation to make that decision. Jefferson wrote, Jefferson did. It is dead, it is past. Him. The ideas, the values, the truths that are so self-evident, these are ours. And hopefully America is right, because these values are passed to us. Martin Luther King Jr. quoted the Declaration of Independence, where he said, "We've come to cash this promissory note." That's in the Eye of a Dream speech, by the way. That's the part you need to know. We've come to cash this promissory note. A check that has not been cashed, that has been voided, he said. That has gone bankrupt. Hopefully it hasn't. That is for us. It is for the current generation. This is why history matters to me. And historians have concluded that if something is seriously wrong with America, and something must seriously be wrong with Jefferson, the values set in that revolution, the struggle for human liberty, is true. The ironies, the hypocrisies, we live with it. But the truth must be what we search for. It's got to be in the heart. It must be believed. Otherwise, it means nothing. But to simply look at race, to simply look at wealth and status alone, that's not it. Jefferson's pursuit of happiness is the ability for talents to be exercised in a free manner, in a hope for better. This is the American identity. Lincoln even pointed that out. If somebody works by the sweat of their brow, they earn, they improve. This is an American identity, that my labor produces the fruits. My labor produces the goods. There is nothing wrong with that I can move up in my station in life. And Lincoln said, how can his life? How can? You work for someone else. They profit from you. What was wrong with America was slavery. What's wrong with America today? You fill in the blank. But I think it's time for a good conversation. Not a violence, not an act of random, unbelievable, unbridled violence. The only solution there is, as the Romans knew, is more civil war. Take a page from them. The values of the Republic, as Cicero said, truly are about ethics and morality, which requires thinking, requires action, but the thinking must come first. Hopefully, if Jefferson is right, America's right. All right. Well, thank you. I hope this makes sense. If not, let me know. Louisiana Purchase, though, once again, you have to thank Haiti. Send them a thank you card, and hopefully we'll have a better time together as Americans. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.